Hello and welcome to the EduChanger podcast, where we look at the real stories behind educational transformation. My name is Bronwyn Lodsey, and I'm a passionate educator in New South Wales, and it's my pleasure to invite you into these conversations today. Today's episode features Jonny Boyle, the co-founder and managing director of Jeddle, an education tech company that provides high-quality resources that are paired with practical approaches to the HSC examinations. The online platform also includes an AI marking feedback system for students, JedAi, and each year Jonny interviews the students who achieve state rank results in their HSC examinations. And he does this in order to understand the strategies and to share those resources with others. These resources have been transformative, such as the case for one school in Newcastle, which saw a 472% increase in Band 6 English results after implementing Jeddle from 7 to 12. With over 50,000 students and teachers served by the platform and 150 schools engaged with Jeddle resources, including a school in the top 5 in New South Wales, 6 million views on YouTube, join with me as we dive into the reasons for this success. Welcome, Jonny.
Thanks very much, Bron. Flattered by the intro. But great to be here.
Now, Jonny, before we get into the details of the impact of consistent quality content and strategy, I really want to know, why did you start Jeddle? Was it for the profit?
So I think anyone who's been in like EdTech businesses knows it's very hard to make a lot of profit to start with. In this game, you're dealing with schools. It's not your typical kind of customer or client, a slow sales cycle. So just from the business point of view, if profit was my main motivator, I'd be in the wrong industry, first of all. But not to say, I don't believe that Jeddle can become very profitable and do very well commercially. But the primary focus, the primary reason I'm still in it, and I've been doing things in education for 12 years now, since I finished high school, is because I'm super passionate about the process of learning, teaching, and helping reverse engineer the success of others and making that knowledge accessible to everyone. And I think that kind of underpins Jeddle's mission. We try to look at what the best achievers are doing, and then how can we simplify that, break it down, and make that replicable for other students who might think that, getting top marks is something completely out of the realm of possibility. So yeah, I fell in love with education actually at high school when I started tutoring someone who caught my bus. He was a couple years younger. His name was James. I know tutoring can throw some teachers off. You're not a real teacher. Okay. But I still got that taste. I was like in year 11 and he was in year 9 and I was tutoring him in maths at first, and I made a bit of English as well. But when I started doing the process and I realized, I'm breaking things down and he was getting better marks, I literally, from that very first student, I fell in love with it. And I was always inspired by great teachers that carried through to university as well. But there was something about my particular attention and curiosity to the quality of these teachers that told me, hey, this is like the space that you're actually interested in. It's not so much what you're actually learning here. I was doing law and economics at UCID, and I was more fascinated by how those lecturers were doing such a great job. And I'm like, I want to do that. And at the same time I was doing it, I was building up this big kind of tutoring presence. I was tutoring a lot of students. We're doing workshops. I was going into schools and doing seminars. And for me, it didn't feel like work. I really enjoyed that process of trying to break things down and help students and see them succeed. First it was a tutoring gig, but it became and has become so much more than that as we've grown the platform. Now it's nothing to do with tutoring. It was about online study guides that were super specific based on the texts that students were doing in English at the HSC level. Then it went to year 7 to 12, covering all of English. And then now we're in Victoria and all across Australia. And we're also helping teachers and students with marking and feedback, because that was the feedback that we got from teachers when we were helping them with the study guides. So the business has been iterated over time, but it's a very long answer to your first question. So I apologize.
Yeah.
The point is I'm still in it, and I've been going through this journey, this evolution of what Jeddle is now, because I just love the space, and I genuinely can't see myself doing anything else or something else that doesn't involve that teaching and learning process.
I mean, I really resonate with that. The love and the joy in seeing someone achieve their potential, whatever that is, and to know that you helped give them access to that. And kind of on that note, Are there some specific case stories that you can think about individual students where they probably did exceed what was expected of them because of this access to educational resources?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got some data on, the students who use Jeddle on the platform as a whole, but then I think the more interesting ones for me are like the anecdotes that I get, and also, and people can see this on socials and YouTube comments where I get emails and comments saying, "Hey, I literally failed this exam in my trials. I just implemented your strategy, followed what you did. I got 20 out of 20 for that section." And funnily enough, like getting those responses and those emails when someone's gone out of their way to actually, find the email and let me know, like they actually mean almost the most, like they mean the most to me at times in terms of in those individual stories. Then when we look at the aggregate data and I can see the kind of validation from the fact I've got it here, like last year, 2025 HSC, 75% of the state rank achievers were Jeddle subscribers in English Advanced, and then it was around 25% for Standard. I mean, that speaks volumes, in terms of really helping students excel. But it's not just that, of course, because then people say, well, you're just helping the top achievers, you're just helping the people do really well. But it's like, no, if we look at the trends, if the top goes up, everyone moves up with them. And I think that's really key, right? So even the students who were doing, who were at a band 4 level before, are progressing up to band 5 and so forth. So I think just moving everyone up in the direction of, what would a perfect essay look like? What would a, perfect quotations, but what does that look like for students to actually succeed in each section of the exam or overall in English, even just no matter what they're doing?
I mean, it's really powerful to hear about individual students. And I think what people can sometimes perceive is that it is only for those top ends. It's just that we don't always hear the stories of the middle or the tail. But can you think about, if we broaden it then, how have you seen providing these resources through Jeddle impact a whole English department?
Yeah, I think one of the best examples is Merriweather High School, which you alluded to in the intro. So that was a school who gradually expanded to years 7 through to 12 with Jeddle and fully went all in on the program because, and we can speak about the culture there, but they went all in on being pragmatic and telling students what's ultimately going to help them succeed in year 12 at the start of year 7. So they went all in on kind of covering it across all years, not waiting to year 12 to tell them what works or help them in that respect. So that was Merriweather, and they have over 1,000 students at the school. Just got the stat here. So in the last 5 years, 470% increase in the band 6 results, but they also got almost 50% of their students consistently when using Jeddle over band 5 and 6. So a lot of their students were being pushed up. It wasn't just the very top. They went from 3.22% band 6 to 18.42%. And they were ranked 22nd, which is a huge increase from 50th in a few years. So that's a school that's done super well. And then Morrison Shore was another one. I was speaking to them recently. 2021, they were outside the top 200, right? And then brought in Jeddle for the last few years with several hundred students. 69th in New South Wales last year. So the schools that, and I think this is really important, schools that really buy into the culture of going pragmatic, showing students kind of a more explicit approach and structured approach to doing well, and are willing to kind of reverse engineer the success of others and show them exactly the template for success, which I'm a strong believer in, purely because as you said as well, I've interviewed hundreds of state rank achievers, and it's just objectively what is working for the given assessments. If those assessments get overhauled and we do exams a different way, that all might change. But for now, there's an objective reality, and then there's idealism of what we think should be the case, which we can talk about. But based on what is the case, Jeddle's been designed to optimize for that for every student, and I've seen some great results.
Let's go into that. What would you say to people who would critique a pragmatic approach, breaking things down with acronym, with formulas? What would you say?
I think that we have to be real and realistic about what the HSC ultimately is, what exams are, and how they actually work, and that there is a best way to prepare for those exams, and structure and giving clear guidance is an essential, but not, it's a necessary but not sufficient step in getting students to succeed. So without structure, students feel lost. We've all been students. If there's no structure, no acronyms, no starting point, most students will feel lost. They won't know where to start. But the confusion, I think, oh, well, if you give them structure, they don't have any voice, and we're not getting them to think for themselves. You hear this kind of rhetoric, but the reality is the structure unlocks that. But you need to do it early, right? You start with structure, and then flexibility comes in for the students who are capable of that. Most students aren't capable of that, and that's okay. Even me in your talk I was not capable of having my own voice, and I did extremely well. So I did not. I think back to it. It's crazy. You probably have the same thing. But once you look at a text when you finish school, if you end up teaching it or studying it in real depth, you realize I knew nothing about Hamlet when I was in 12, and yet I got full marks of the essay for that. But I didn't really understand it. I didn't have my own voice, but I was really good at being resourceful, looking at exemplary materials and crafting my own essay, but drawing from others. I was extremely resourceful, and that's one of the trends you see across all the state rank achievers, all the top achievers, incredibly resourceful. They'll go out of their way they dig for gold, right? I used to think, I'm digging for gold here. I'm looking at these articles, I'm looking at extra things, trying to get anything that could elevate the sophistication of my response. And that might be kind of controversial, but the point is the structure is the best way of getting there. Even at university, I could never really come up with a unique idea until I kind of got through the structure and I got the formula out and I kind of got the main things down. Then I had enough time to think about it and play with it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I got a unique take on that. Something connected. I was able to synthesize a couple of things just then. And that's my one little unique thread in that paper. Yeah. And that's it. And that was a success. Great if you can get there. But if we're talking about HSC students trying to do well, you can get them a long way, but it doesn't have to be there. And if we pretend that structure and a pragmatic approach is not going to work, then I think that's going to honestly detriment a lot of students. And actually, it will do the opposite of what you think it will do. That's my view.
Well, what I would like to know next then on that point is when you speak to these state ranking students, what is it that they say? I mean, does it confirm what you're saying? What did they employ? What tactics have they had to achieve such a huge success?
Yeah, so I've written it down here in preparation for it. I've got the tactics, the differentiators, or as some people might like to hear it, like the state rank secrets that I've accumulated over time by literally speaking to all of the state rank achievers. So this stuff, as much as it sounds like my opinion, is my opinion because of the facts.
And would you say that then you feed that back into Jeddle? It's like this recursive relationship where you're listening, putting that into Jeddle. Jeddle is feeding out this to this 75% that are coming back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We update the resources in that way. We want to keep staying on top of our game with exemplary responses, but also deconstructing them and making sure the analysis is at a high level. But things like JedAi, like as a feedback and marking tool, that is the byproduct of this need and this trend. So teachers need help, dealing with the marking load, but also what's this trend with students? What are they doing the most of? They're doing tons of drafts. They're doing so many drafts, so much editing, and that's one of the points here. And they're getting tons of feedback. It's impossible for every teacher to accommodate that demand at every school. Some schools, smaller classes, and they can do it, and not every student is hassling the teacher. But if you look at the supply and demand equation there, it's like, okay, what do students really want? They want feedback that's high quality, as fast as possible, that's going to help them improve right now.
And would you say with the people that you've interviewed, they say that they do get a lot of feedback on their drafting process?
It's one of the biggest things. I was going to say, before I go through the list, sorry to hold back on that, the kind of cultural pillars that I think are common throughout all of the top achievers that I've spoken with and the schools that have done exceptionally well, just to go through them, because that will kind of give a nice frame for the tactics that are being used here. The cultural pillars, as I said, pragmatism, not idealism. So the school is approaching the practical realities of the exam. They're reverse engineering it, and they've kind of got this straight line efficient method of teaching it and saying, hey, you need to prepare a draft for this section. We're going to perfect that draft. You're then going to learn it. We're then going to do lots of practice questions, and that's it. And that's all we have time for. And you will learn a lot in that process. Hopefully you read the text and you engaged with the classes as well. And we really want to optimize all of that. But at the end of the day, on a practical level, that's what they're targeting. And you know that because the students are saying that's all I was spending my time doing. So they have that culture. The other thing is they're very explicit. The teachers are very explicit at these schools. They'll give them structures and exemplary responses. In fact, I was speaking to State Rank Achiever the other day. I think she was from North Sydney Girls High School. they have these huge Google drives of responses from students. And it's not like every student's essay is always published for everyone to see, but they have a huge compilation of examples from each other. And that way they can all benefit from seeing each other's work. So that requires, again, a certain attitude and a buy-in from teachers and the whole school, right? This is what we're going to do. We're going to show students the path. This is what it looks like. We might have to take a couple steps back for a lot of students and break that down and simplify it and incrementally get them there, which is super important. Like, I don't think you should just jump to exemplar standard for every student because it's inaccessible for a lot of students.
So you're showing them that clear endpoint, and then you're working backwards to provide the steps in order to get to that place.
That's exactly right. So you've got to set the standard high. They set the standard. This is a 20. Okay, you're at a 12. Let's get you to a 14, 16. Let's move you up there, right? Obviously, it's some of these selective schools, the students, the average talent and ability is very high to start with, admittedly. But there's some schools that have done super well where the students have come all the way up because they had that bar. There was an accurate bar, an accurate standard to aspire towards. So I think that's really important. And the third thing, the third pillar was like these schools are very collaborative and competitive at the same time.
Interesting.
Yeah, really interesting blend. There's a competitive aspect. It doesn't always have to be, I want to beat this student who sits next to me. They naturally, a lot of these students who are top achievers are like that, and they do want to, become rank one at the end. That's just the truth. Again, that's how they're motivated. A lot of them are intrinsically motivated like that. They just want to get the best possible rank and the best possible mark. But funnily enough, at the schools that have done incredibly well, like North Sydney Boys, a couple of years ago, I spoke with Jordan Ho, the school captain, in their groundbreaking year where they dethroned James, was the collaborative effort, but also the competitive effort on a school level. He said they set a goal. They said, this year we are beating James, and it gets group buy-in. So I actually love that. And I think that's a lot better than trying to go up against your peers. But we were talking about this a bit earlier. The nature of the assessment with, the rank being finalized after trials and then it being more of a team effort up to the HSC, you're incentivizing that as a system. And again, this is about being honest about the system. The system is rewarding students for doing better than their peers at the same school up until trials. And then it's incentivizing everyone to help each other so that everyone pulls each other up when it comes to the HSC as a school. So that's how the system is set up. So it's very hard to get around that. I think culturally you can, and that was an extreme example of it a second ago. But yeah, that's one of the tricky things. I don't think that's an easy thing to solve. But they're collaborative. If we just take the collaborative, they share responses, they help each other. Something I did when I was in year 12, did a lot. I had two friends who were kind of at a similar level. They ended up getting state ranks and we were at similar mark. And we would exchange essays all the time and give each other feedback. And even if you just do it with one or two people in your year who have a similar aspiration or ability, because then you're more willing to reciprocate if you perceive it like that, then that's a huge benefit. And all of these state rank achievers talk about collaborative peer feedback, not just hassling the teacher for a ton of feedback, which they do as well. So shout out to all the teachers who are generous enough to do it. And I had teachers who did that as well. And they were up at crazy hours before exams, responding to emails to get that feedback to me. So thank you very much. And that's kind of a key pillar as well.
Say though that was student led, that decision, or did teachers encourage that? Why don't you swap?
Teachers definitely encouraged it. I can't remember, to be honest, if it was explicitly put out there, but this is the thing, it was in the culture. So obviously at some point it probably was, but it's more through behaviors and it's implicit endorsement of these things. So the teachers knew we were sharing essays and things like that, and they definitely did not discourage it. They thought that was really helpful. A lot of the time teachers could only catered for so many students, for so many drafts at one point. So, hey, what have you asked Max about your essay? Why don't you trade essays there? Like there were those kind of conversations. But again, it was kind of built into the culture of the school. So it was more powerful than any teacher having to explicitly say it.
And where being aspirational was seen as valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the expectation at these schools who perform really well is that you will do a lot of drafts and that you will get a lot of feedback. It's expected. And because everyone around you is doing it, you will naturally feel compelled to do it. Intrinsically motivated individuals probably do it anyway, who are those top achievers. But everyone else, which is a lot of people, and even the intrinsic ones as well, everyone is affected by what people around them are doing. Like the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. It's the same case for academic culture. If everyone around you is submitting essays 2 weeks before the assessment, you're going to feel like, hey, I should probably get onto that draft and I should submit some work, right? Because everyone's getting the feedback from the teacher in class. So that's cultural, that's behavioral. And I think that stuff is really key at these top performing schools.
Okay, so you've explained the environment, the culture of these top performers. Now, what are the practical strategies?
Okay, cool. So I might just like rattle these up and we can go deeper into any one that you like. So there's a bit of an order to it. I focus obviously on English for this example, but we can extrapolate it and apply it to other subjects as well. And I'm just going to use essays as an example because that's 60% of the exam in year 12, and that's the easiest thing to model off. So um, what do all the state rankers do? And this is almost 100% of them. I put down all the trends that cover almost every single state rank achiever. Okay, so everything we're about to say, it has some caveats, and I'll note those as I go through, but this is almost 100% of the people that I've spoken to do this. They start preparing early. They start preparing drafts straight away.
Now, when you say early, you mean term 4, or do you mean?
I mean, some students, and this is where we get to the edge cases, and I'm actually included in this, before the first official term of year 12 starts, they're already thinking about structure for the essay, for the first essay.
But that's surely student-led.
That's student-led. Yeah, this is what the students are doing. Yeah, absolutely. This isn't to say the school is driving this, or this is just what these students have done. Yeah. So they're preparing early. They're not all doing it that early necessarily, but whenever an assessment comes out, they all say the same thing. I just start that night. I have to start that night because what they're doing is they're then doing things with the right kind of emphasis. The emphasis should be on editing, getting feedback, improving your drafts over time, not getting that first draft up to scratch so I can memorize it and then I go into the exam the next day. The sequence is out for so many students, but if you get the first draft done, you start early and you start simple. This is where students get afraid to do this. Oh, I don't know what I'll start with. Just start simple. This is why your structure. Well, how do I start simple? Use this structure, peel, pedal, whatever it is. Just use that first. Don't overthink anything. Order your ideas. Start with some topic sentences, something like that. So they'll all do this. They'll start planning out their ideas. They might not be all the way through the unit. And then they've got a couple of weeks after to iterate and edit and get tons of feedback from each other, from teachers. Obviously, some have tutors as well. Hopefully JedAi's in the picture later for a lot of students, but that's why it's there, because that's going to be the bulk of the time. It's refining your work. That's where the critical thinking will come in. That's where the research happens. So it's kind of a non-starter if you don't get that one right. So that's why that's number one, because if you're starting the process late, you're kind of destroying your chances of doing well in English. I've always said it's a preparation subject based on the exam. It's not, let's go into the exam and it's a snapshot of your English abilities. The exam is just not that objectively. It's you have to have done a lot of preparation, practiced a lot of questions, hopefully have your drafts polished and you've had them looked over and you've cut them down and timed. We can talk about the strategy there, but it's all preparation. And if people just take one thing away from it, if schools, students, teachers, start them as early as possible. How do you do that as a teacher? You ask for their draft. You ask for the first draft well in advance of the due date. Now, a lot of teachers do that and say, send me a draft, a week before. Do it the day after. This is what all the top students are doing. It's such an easy behavioral thing to change, but it takes time and it takes a cultural shift. So that's the first one.
Yeah, keep going.
16 months. Okay. They prepare one master draft per essay, mostly. Some students do additional work, and some of them do more than that. Some of them will have additional extracts and possible pieces of analysis if they found that their base essay doesn't work for a particular question when they get to a later stage of doing lots of practice questions. But all of these students are focusing on one master draft per essay and getting that one perfect draft per module, per focus area.
So just to clarify, of the state ranking students that you've spoken with, what percentage would have this type of essay prepared?
100% have at least the one master draft, and then a portion of those will have some extra paragraphs. And there's another portion that are kind of in the non-replicable case where they're incredibly talented, and I don't think this is something that other students can do. And they do so much practice writing. They love the subject so much, and they're so talented that they're effectively reusing the same things again and again, but they're changing the orders in an ad hoc way, depending on the question, which is a great ideal. I wish everyone could do that. I couldn't do that. And that's, again, the realism and pragmatism that needs to be part of this conversation. It's those outliers of the state rank achievers who are doing it. And that's not to say they're the ones who are coming first, right? I've interviewed a lot of students who have come first in the state, and there's a mixed bag there. Some of them were really naturally gifted writers who also did all these steps, but they had more versatility to their writing and approach. But at the bare minimum, everyone had that kind of one master draft.
Yeah, so no one that you've spoken to that's had a state rank has walked in there only with quotations.
Absolutely not. Yeah, yeah, I don't want to use graphic terminology, but you're shooting yourself in the foot if you do that, and you're not giving yourself the best chance based on what we've said. All right, number 3. So they start, and this is the structural point, they start with tight structures, then they gradually adjust parts that sound repetitive. And what I mean by that is they all have a structure that often it's the one that their school would advocate for, or it's one of the options that their school gives them. And for instance, use 3 body paragraphs. Within the body paragraphs, do pedal, but have 4 pieces of evidence, or it might be the IQ TVE thing we were talking about. So they have structures. They have a formulaic approach at first, but the best students, these top achievers, they all have some flexibility with the structure. So the top ones are using the structure as a step 1, and then they're deviating from it because they realize if I just have every sentence start with the technique again and again, and then it uses this verb, then this verb, that doesn't sound like it has any flair. It has no voice to it, right? It's really good analysis, but it's not sounding like my own. I want to give it some, some flair. So these students have flair in their writing, but they get there via structure. That's the point we're talking about earlier. You get there via structure. If you master the structure, then you can start playing with it.
In the editing process. Yeah. Okay, now let's drill down even further in terms of what quotes are they choosing, what vocab are they using, what sources are they going to?
Yeah, okay. These top achievers, this is something they all bring up. I rarely even have to probe for this one when I'm interviewing them. They dig for gold, right? That's right, we'll dig in for gold. They do independent research. They're reading a lot of JSTOR, Google Scholar, and I'll throw Jeddle in the mix because we know 75% of them use that. Jeddle's like kind of a way of consolidating all of that research that a lot of students won't do realistically. But they are looking for those phrases. They're looking for that vocab that's going to set them apart. It's one of the key differentiators is the sophistication of their vocabulary, the phrases, and even the ideas that come out occasionally. The turns of phrase, the way they're framing that perspective, that's informed by a lot of independent research where they've gone digging and they've made a Google Doc, for instance, and written down, and I do this with students as well, they write down all the key phrases and good bits of vocab, and then it might only be like 10 things that for any student can do this, read something that's accessible, and just think, I'm going to try and use those somewhere in my work. And it's just, at least it's something beyond what I was going to do by default. Because what most students will do by default is going to put you into the norm. So how do you set yourself apart? Right. So you go and find, this is exemplary material. It could even be in an academic format. That might not work for everyone. Again, Jeddle's a more simplified version of that, but then there are plenty of other resources. There's teacher resources. Anything you see that wouldn't have naturally come to you, you've got to push yourself to include some of that into your work. So again, making a Google Doc record of it, and then when you're doing your drafts, consciously trying to incorporate that. So you're extending yourself.
Now, how much time would these students set aside for their study?
Yes, some of the numbers, it's kind of it varies a lot in terms of when they're spending all their time on English specifically, but the numbers for students who are at the top of the state for English, it tends to correlate with students who have done really well overall, so like 99 plus ATARs. The hours before trials and the HSC are insane. Like it's 8 to 10 hours average for those students in those busy pre-trials, pre-HSC period. And actually, a lot of them, a lot of the 2025 state rank achievers that I was speaking to, it was quite notable that they were saying the pre-trials chapter was a lot more hectic than pre-HSC. And I think that's because they were finalizing everything, and then they could just effectively reuse it if they did really well in the HSC. So the pre-trials, they were going hard, like up to 10 hours per day. A lot of these students, they're not doing the 10 hours on English per day, though. They're doing multiple subjects, but a lot of them would do at least one paper in the morning equivalent. So like say 2-3 hours, sit down with an English paper. They might not do the whole paper, but they'll spend that equivalent amount of time going through their drafts or looking at different questions and thinking about how they could answer it. That's something that's very common to a lot of the top achievers as well. They do a lot of practice questions. There was one student who actually told me he did 40 past paper questions, which is an obscene amount of papers, but he didn't do full responses to all of them. one thing everyone can take away from it, even I always say, just do at least like 3 to 5 before you go into an exam, and you don't have to do full write-outs of your essays or crafted writing pieces. Develop the mental model to know how to understand a question in a couple of minutes, and huge, right? Because people, you could tell students, hey, you need to answer the question. They don't know what that means unless they have practice and they have a model for doing that. And sometimes it's a lot simpler than people think, right? How do you identify the key terms? How do you unpack them? How can I incorporate them? But what a lot of these top achievers did is they mastered this adaptation process. So, and this is something that I did as well back when I was at school, is I would do a lot of practice questions, which is, what you're supposed to do even in the ideal scenario. And I would get really good at finding connections between the core argument that I wanted to run in my essay and that I had in the draft, in the master draft. But I would find these connections between those ideas, the ideas of each body paragraph, which already tracked the progression of the text, and the keywords that came up in the question. So I became really good at connecting keywords of the question with what the argument I wanted to run. And then in that way, you kind of make the essay question work for you rather than you working for the essay question. Because as soon as you fall in the latter category of working for the essay question, students will unnecessarily disregard a lot of the great material that they've prepared throughout the whole year because they think, oh, that's not relevant. It's like, did you think about how if you interpreted that in the opposite way, or you framed that in the opposite way, that would have worked perfectly? And the amount of conversations I've had, I'm sure you've had the same, where students say, oh, I couldn't use that. I couldn't use the thing I'd prepared, or I couldn't, that idea didn't work. And I said, like say it's the famous, like, infamous crucible love question, right? Yeah. The love question in 2019. So there's this question on love, and students didn't associate the play with love because they thought it was very negative play. So, but love has a positive connotation. But as soon as you talk about a love of ideology, you frame it negatively, or an absence of love. It's amazing what adding those couple of words does. Oh, now my whole essay is relevant just because I had the mental model to know, hey, think about it in the opposite. Be as flexible as possible with those key terms. The question's not telling you a narrow interpretation. It's just giving you the key term and you have to deal with it. Students don't realize they have actually a lot of flexibility and autonomy in how you interpret it. And in fact, that's what gives you voice and authenticity. If you can actually have an argument you like and find ways to connect it to the key terms of the question, it's kind of like doing 2 birds in 1 stone, right? You're able to keep a lot of your material that you perfected over time, which is more sophisticated, which is essential to do well. And you're also answering the question in a unique way because you connect love with your concept of control or something like that.
Yeah, and that agility of thinking comes through dedicated practice, sitting there wrestling with different questions, thinking through how to answer things. It's not just going to happen overnight.
Exactly. And this is the thing, it got drilled into me, especially in year 12 by my English teacher. She would get us to, and I think it's something that everyone can do in class, right? Where everyone's there, pull up a question, pull up a stimulus and think, okay, do 3 to 5 dot points. How are you interpreting that? And we just went through that process of how are we dealing with this question, and we'll just do it again and again and again. And you need to spend a lot of time doing it because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing to nail the question, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy to not spend you just spend a fraction of the time on teaching students how to actually break down a question and be clever and crafty. In some cases because of the idealism behind it. But if you have that pragmatic approach, which goes back to culture, you will actually drill that in and realize, hey, this is like an 80-20 exercise, right? 80-20 being this is the most efficient thing we could be doing right now. If students have been editing their work over time and creating this perfect draft essay that's timed and cut down and it's had feedback and you've tested against different questions, the only other important thing is how well can you handle a new question, an unseen question? Do you have the modeling? Do you have the tactics to go through and quickly do that in a 40-minute exam where these top achievers are often doing over 1,000 words in 40 minutes, which is a crazy amount of words. How can you do all of that? You have to drill it in and you have to be really prepared for it.
I mean, I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't know how much you can say about this, but when you speak to these students about their schools and their teachers and the things that they've experienced, how many of them mention that co-creation process that their teacher put the question on the board, worked it out with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers on that. I don't always ask that question, but it's a really good question. It'd be good to know. I know for a fact that some of our top performing schools that they use Jeddle that I've gone into and I've done like a talk, I've seen it happening where they have given them booklets of practice questions and they talk about it and discuss it in class relentlessly. St. Catherine's is a school we worked with. They came first in the state in English as a school in that subject a few years back. And that's something they did. So, if any school's thinking, well, how do you do well in English? They modeled it relentlessly. They got students to think about different scenarios. How would you interpret it? Just getting students to turn on that part of their brain that's like, I have to find a way through here. I have to find a way to interpret this that makes sense to me. And the thing that's going to make sense to you the most is going to be linked to the thing you've been working on, which goes back to the master draft, if we're being super pragmatic about it. If you just get them to do that's going to change everything. Now every student has a true shot at Band 6 because they're ticking the answer in the question part of the criteria better than they otherwise would.
I mean, the question I most want to ask when I come across things that you're doing or other educators are doing is, does it work for every student? Is achievement, not necessarily Band 6, but do these strategies, does this content work for every student?
On some level, I think it does. I think it doesn't guarantee the results. Like, not every student can get Band 6 anyways. Like, it's impossible, right? Because of the bell curve. But it doesn't guarantee it. But I'm a big believer in at least modeling that, have that standard, and then pull everyone up, right? It's just like, do as much as you can that models off what the best students are doing. The method that you might use to do some of those things actually might need to be tweaked based on what type of learner you are.
So from all the things that we've been speaking about in terms of state ranks, school culture, having access to resources like Jeddle, in your opinion, can any student in any school succeed?
Yeah, 100%. And people will ask, well, what is succeeding? But can they improve? Can they do much better than they think using a structure and using these methods that we're seeing the best students use? Absolutely. Every student can do better. Hard work is one of the most important variables in all of this. And this is, I've got a story and an observation.
No, please.
So, so the story is, when I was at school, we had a student, right, who was never considered in the mix of like the top achievers, right? And it got to like kind of end of year 11, and we noticed there were rumors going around about how hard this guy started to work. They're like, oh, he's working on the weekends. He says he's not going to any parties in year 12. Yeah, boo-hoo. But he started to really switch it on. He was an average student, right? Like, now I went to a good school, admittedly, St. Aloysius, and the median there was probably like a 98er, so which is high. He was probably around the 90 mark expected, and then he cranked it up. Nothing changed other than his work ethic. He worked relentlessly. He was outworking the rest of us, and he was working all weekends. Everyone knew about it somehow, and he ended up getting 99.2 as an ATAR, and he was on more of a 90 ATAR or less. Kind of predicted.
If we're going to say, yeah,
predicted, right? So, and again, I know these are big numbers, but you take the principle of it, hard work. This is actually a great example because it's incredibly hard to go from 90 to 99. There's only so many people who get above 99. That should prove to everyone. If you're a 70 prediction, getting to 80 is no problem, right? It's much easier to move up. So if someone can go from 90 to 99, you can go from 70 to 80, 80 to 90 with hard work. So hard work trumps all, but smart work is what we're talking about as well. Tactics, strategy, have a framework. That's how you'll be more motivated to do it because, this is the other observation. I think this idea of gaming the system and hacking it is a little bit misguided. It's a good thing. If you game the system to get full marks, that means you actually worked ridiculously hard because that is the game. The game is to prepare, and preparing entails all of these things we're talking about. Drafting, editing, getting feedback, practicing all these different questions. And then if you say, oh, so you kind of gamed it. Yeah, okay, I gamed it and I won and I did the work, right? So the only kind of hack that I think teachers really do worry about is, you take someone's essay that they, from the year before, someone who got a 20 out of 20, you take it, you just memorize it and you go in. But if you don't know how to deal with new questions, if you don't understand the text, there's huge vulnerabilities in that approach. And to be honest, like, I know some students do that. Not a lot of students do it. And it's easy to track.
And surely not any state rankers that you've spoken to.
No, none of them. They're working ridiculously hard. Talent plays a role. But as I said, you could be a student who doesn't see themselves as in that top tier. You can get there. If you just outwork, you can get there. But work on the right things. That's why I was going on about the 80-20 rule. what are you focusing your attention on? Are you just making notes and, like redoing notes on things? That doesn't take you that far with English. What takes you far is working on that draft, keep going through it, edit, read it out loud, time it, cut it down so you know you've got a buffer for the exam. Get more feedback from your teacher, get feedback from wherever else you can, keep editing, learn it really well. If that means memorize, great. If you can do that, that's definitely an advantage. Anyone's lying to you who says that's not an advantage. If you can memorize, it's an advantage. But because you did so many practice questions, you're not just going to regurgitate it, which is what teachers really worry about. And if they are saying don't memorize, it's because of that. They think you're just going to regurgitate and not answer the question. But you've got to do those two things together. And if you can memorize while you're practicing different questions, even better. But yeah, that's if that's gaming the system, then everyone should be gaming the system, and every teacher should say game the system. It's kind of like a good psychological motivator as well, because students love to game things and hack things. Hey, here are the hacks. Here are the 30,000 steps you have to do. They're the hacks. Okay, good luck.
I actually love what you have said about effort, because in my experience in education, so often it's the student who is working really hard that succeeds. At the end of the day, it comes down to preparation, refinement, editing, all of those things. And I presume, that's been a huge part of why you created JedAi, was to give students 24-hour access. Is there anything on the list that's unusual or that you think is worth?
Look, there's a couple of things. I mean, we could talk about that quote selection point.
Yeah. Let's because I can always pop these things back in,
Or you could, you do.
or I can do an
And
outtake.
so an outtake and be like, here are the other things.
Yeah, which is the list of kind of key insights that you've gained from state ranking students. What are some of the most unusual kind of tips that you've garnered?
One of the ones that really stood out for me recently was the fact that all of these top achievers, when they're selecting their evidence for their essays, they're finding niche quotes, right? They even termed it, a couple of them said niche quotes, right? So they're finding quotes that are deliberately going to stand out from the rest of the state, because they know, and we know, 7 years plus of the same syllabus, teachers have read the same type of evidence tens of thousands of times in some cases, Crucible 1984, Billy Elliot. So they're deliberately finding niche quotes that no one else is using, presumably. Like they think, okay, this isn't something that we looked at directly, or maybe the class has because they have that culture of finding niche quotes, but it's not something that comes up on Spark Notes or something like that. It's not one of those top ones. So if you can dig up some different quotes that is not going to trigger the autopilot in the marker to just think, okay, you're just making the same point about Big Brother is watching you. I've heard it. You could have an incredible point after you, but you're really devaluing that point if you pair it with a cliche or overused example. So I think just finding a slightly different quote that still has the same meaning, just literally go for a flick through the book. I mean, even with 1984, I've done this before with students. I just go to a random page, find a quote. I'm like, no one's used that. And if we analyze that for a second, great technique. And that's saying exactly what you want to argue. So there's heaps of examples that prove the same point in texts. Find those niche ones is another one.
It's a good one, isn't it?
I tell you one other one.
No, I love it.
They pick niche quotes. One other thing that is like, it is what everyone does who does well, and it's so important, is that students, when they are doing their analysis in their body paragraphs, if we're talking about essays, they use more than one quote in the sentence of analysis. And what I mean by that is they'll use a quote, short quote, by the way, that's another little sub tip. They don't use long quotes. They told you, they break them up, they fragment it.
So trabs.
Exactly. So it flows into the sentence. They'll have their primary quote, I call it the primary quote that has the technique associated with it, metaphor in this quote, okay? Then when they go on to explain the effect of that, they weave in even single word quotes or little phrases into how they're explaining or evaluating that primary quote. So there's a double up of quotes. And what that does is it deepens your textual engagement, and it just looks way more impressive, but it's so simple to do. Again, you can do a page flick of the novel or whatever text you're doing. Just find a word that kind of replaces the word you were going to use when explaining the meaning of the other quote, and just quote that in, drop that in. Yeah, that's it's as simple as that. But if you actually do that, again, this is not a step one thing I'm talking about. This is a step two. This is not part of the start simple, start early. And again, I have to just put that out there because a lot of students get overwhelmed by all of this. Oh, so many tactics, so many things I have to do. I don't know where to start. Don't start with any of this. Start with your basic structure.
This is down the iteration path.
Absolutely. It's far down. And as you look at it, it might be one of the last things on your checklist. The success criteria that have I used secondary quotes? We can call them secondary quotes. Have I integrated them in to replace some of my own words so I can deepen the textual engagement and not have the cliche one long quote per sentence?
This is so fascinating. Can you tell us another rare one?
This is not like super rare, but this will be obvious, but it's just something that really needs to be pushed. These students, top achievers, they focus on macro features. They don't focus on micro techniques. So let's think about the average student. They quickly write in an essay. They haven't done all the prep. What kind of techniques will they be naturally looking for? Similes, metaphors, personification. They're specific techniques. They're micro techniques that you can find in a specific line. But the best students prioritize a different set of techniques, and that's to do with the form of the whole text. The fact that it's a play. Okay, it's the dramatic form. What does that mean? Well, there are soliloquies and there are stage directions here, and there's authorial intrusion. Things that recur throughout the text, not that you just find in a specific line. They're the macro features. It could be to do with the genre as well. Maybe something plays into the speculative tone of the novel. So when you start engaging with language on that macro level, speculative tone, this is part of the Gothic genre. We've got this epistolary kind of structure because there's letters. The best students are putting that as their number one, and the micro techniques, the little similes, not to belittle them, they're important, but they kind of come second. When it comes to the emphasis, they might not come second in the process. Start with the micro techniques and then think, what's a macro technique? Like, is this framed from a first person narrative voice, or first person perspective? Maybe that's your macro for the sentence, and you tie it in with a simpler technique.
Which is essentially a focus on form and how it functions as a whole, the text functions as a whole.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's a big one. And the other one that's kind of related to that is context. So the best students have a lot of, we can use that word niche again if we like, but they have niche or specific contextual influences woven throughout their response.
Do you think it's particularly obscure or unusual information, or just?
I think it's hyper specific and might not immediately click with a marker or a teacher. Like sometimes I see examples that students have done and I'm like, I don't know that specific reference, but it seems valid. If I was to research it, I'm sure it is. They might refer to a particular thing. Like I'll give it a simple example. Like in 1984, you could refer to the post-war period, Cold War. That's pretty generic, and you might say that in the introduction somewhere. But when you do an actual example, you might refer to how the children are being manipulated, right? And the spies, the little spies, that reflects the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth is a concept specific to that time of history, and that is almost a direct reflection of that. It's similar, so it parallels the Hitler Youth. And if you can have a little phrase like that, paralleling the Hitler Youth to expose this idea, now you've got a much more sophisticated piece of analysis. So if you can find those, they don't need to be crazy niche. I think don't make them inaccessible, but things like that, there's a ton. If you just make a list, use Jeddle, ChatGPT, even honestly for research, get it to produce a list, go verify it, and that can give you that edge.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Want me to keep going? Or...
Yeah, I want to see if there's anything else.
All right, let's see what we got. We've talked about sophisticated vocabulary. That goes without saying. Yeah, it's so funny as well. Like one of the best teachers I ever had, shout out to Gemma Vanderbeer. She was my English teacher. I think, I think she's still at Redlands now. So I can remember little moments of great teaching from her because they stuck with me. And if I just go back to one of these moments, she used to give us this, like, I guess we can call it stretch vocabulary, where it was a word that was not familiar to us, but she didn't overload us with them. And she would have these sessions and she would use a word and then she would stop and she'd be like, who knows what that means? And she'd write it on the board. And, one word I always remember is perpetuates, right? So what does perpetuates mean? And she brought it up, it was in year 8. And then she wrote it down and she made a point of it. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to use that. And she would encourage that. And then I used it in my response and then she celebrated it, right? And sure, there's some ego in that. Yeah, you use my choice of word, but I get it, but it's just great teaching, to be honest. She was all for the student and kind of pushing you. So positive reinforcement on the vocab side, just had a flashback to it. That was a powerful moment. And then I wanted to do that more. I'm going to keep listening to my teacher. And if I hear a word that I don't understand, I'll write it down. If they don't pause and explain it, I'll ask them. And then I'm going to try and use it. If you try and use it, you internalize it and it becomes part of your vocab. And that's something I did all the time, actually.
And it's quite a vulnerable process to use that for the first time when you're not 100% sure. So then to have that validation from that teacher perpetuates your use of higher, like, extensive vocabulary.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was a big one. And I guess I'll give you the last one. I think I've mentioned they write a lot. I mean, I don't know why I still get shocked because I speak to these students all the time, but honestly, some of the numbers shock me. Like, and I was one of those students who wrote a lot, but not as much as some of these students are writing, like 1,200 plus words for an English advanced.
In 40 minutes.
In 40 minutes, it's crazy. It's not necessary, and I should make that clear because there are some students on them come out with 900. I used to write about 850, 900 words and try and be really concise, and that takes a lot of editing. How are you going to compress all that information that is necessary to get you the top marks? Context, we just talked about macro features, embedded a second quote. How do you do all that? It's only through editing that you can press it all and become that's a truly great writer if you can get all of that in a few words. But yeah, otherwise you can be inefficient. But these students, there's no doubt a bias towards a longer essay and I'm saying that because it's come up all the time. They write a lot, minimum 900 words from all the people I've spoken to recently, up to about 1,200 was coming up a lot as well. Some were even longer. It's an important point. It's kind of, it's just the reality. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it does say, hey, if you can work on your handwriting speed, that's valuable. That is valuable. And by the way, what's the easiest way to write more? It's to memorize your base essay. But so don't tell students not to memorize, because if they don't know what they're writing, they are going to take so much longer to write. These students are rapid fire writing, and they've already internalized the model to answer the question. So two things are happening at once. They already know how to start the next sentence. They're way ahead of it. And they already know how to weave the question in. So if you learn the base essay really well, you've timed it to allow a buffer time. So if it's a 40-minute essay, I would say 32 minutes is kind of the magic number that's been tested. 32-minute draft. You can write, that back to front. You've practiced it a lot of times. And then as you go through, you are weaving in the question and you'll finish right about at 40 minutes. But if you don't have a learned essay, you're going to take so long even thinking how to start the sentence. That's the thing that really bothers me. It's like, at least we need to give them something for students who are really struggling, because if they don't have any structure, back to the structure point, what's going to happen in the exam? And I've seen what happens, and it's not good. It's all mess, and they can't reflect their actual capability because they didn't have the strategy down, which is why strategy is so important. And hey, good point to finish on here. What last point? This is my favorite one. The best students help other students.
Yeah.
Right? Teaching is the best way to learn, and plays into collaboration. You won't believe how much you can be saved by another student's great performance. That might become your assessment mark and your final mark. There's a practical benefit, or even just from a selfish point of view, you should help others. And that's something essentially all of them do.
But this is where I want to ask the more challenging question, because I know that in education, AI elicits a lot of responses from educators, some positive, some negative. So what evidence helps you to know that JedAi is improving learning, not just efficiency? And what dangers does it, if any, pose?
Well, I'll deal with the dangers first, I think, because there's obviously a lot of stigma around AI use, a lot of fears around how it's being used. I think if you want to build an effective AI teaching product like JedAi, you have to do it very carefully. You have to consult with a lot of teachers, and you have to keep the pedagogy as the number one focus. And I think that's the key thing, because there's a lot of generic essay graders out there.
Sure.
ChatGPT is the most generic essay grader, right? You can pop something into that and you're going to get feedback quickly. But whether it's the right form of feedback, the type, whether it's calibrated to your style, it's very unlikely all those things are going to be ticked off. And you might not know how to prompt it. You might prompt the AI in a slightly different way to someone else, and suddenly you're getting a very different type of feedback. So key thing is build it with teachers. We co-created JedAi with teachers, and pedagogy first. Everything on the feedback, it's meant to reflect best practice, feedback, and marking. So it can be optimized and tailored to the teacher, especially some of the latest things we've got with marking controls and preferences. But the key is that it's actually meant to demonstrate that it's an interface that is conducive to good learning. And the danger, of course, that comes up a lot is that, what if students are generating AI to put into JedAi, or how do we track that? Well, ultimately, the mission with JedAi is that you can actually, one, get students to iterate over time. We've been talking about how much drafting and iterations these top achievers are doing. So the goal with it is that students are doing their very first draft, that start early draft, step one, building that first paragraph, and then iterating over time, resubmitting, tracking the version history. The teacher can see the development over time and spot the skill gaps or knowledge gaps. And the idea is to track it as this iterative process. So I think that's critical, because otherwise you can just get ChatGPT to write something, put it into JedAi, teacher gets JedAi to market. There's no human involved at all, which is kind of the worst case scenario, right? You got the student AI and the teacher AI, and they're just talking to each other, which is a pretty grim reality, right? There's also things we try and do, though, in addition to the kind of iterative model, uploading handwritten responses. A lot of classes are going back to doing more handwritten writing in class, so they can guarantee the students are actually doing it. You could then scan that and upload it, and ensure that the students actually did it.
And it will read it.
Yeah, it will read it, and that technology is getting better and better. You would know, student writing can be very messy. It's a huge issue, so it's not like going to go beyond the human capability of reading it. But the good thing we actually added was the ability for the student to convert it, and if it's not right, they can adjust it before they submit it. So it at least gets the student to recheck their work and see whether there's a discrepancy between the handwritten and the typed.
Assume that JedAi is pre-filled with New South Wales rubrics, exemplars, syllabus, etc., etc.
Exactly. So all of the templates are in there. It's New South Wales, Victoria, anywhere else, so that when you go on, you're just getting the most relevant form of feedback. The comment banks can all be customized by the teachers and edited. So the idea of making it incredibly personalized to the teacher is our goal. With this, we want to give the student fast feedback, but it should be in the style and kind of tone that the teacher would provide that feedback. And the teacher should always be able to override it and edit it. So all of these things are being factored in. To answer your question about the dangers.
Yeah.
All of these are answering different dangers. Like now the teacher's not involved in the loop. Well, the teacher can be in the loop. In fact, you're driving it. You decide how it's being used with JedAi. And these are all considerations that we've had to factor in based on speaking with actual teachers. So I think that's absolutely critical.
Just to jump in there, what is the feedback that you have had from students on JedAi?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, first of all, we've had over 50,000 draft cycles have gone through JedAi, right? Which speaks a lot to, students are using it. They like it. If we're being honest, like, students really like numbers. They like to know what mark they would get. And JedAi has been a bit annoying to them, and it doesn't give them a numerical mark. It gives them kind of an indicative grade range, if you have that in the rubric, but it can do.
So like B plus A,
A,
or A, B, C.
That's right. Split into the categories that would be modeled from the HSC rubrics, and then 7 to 11 as well. So that's one of the things they would look for, but they'll definitely look at that. But we don't show them that first. We show them the comment banks, the annotations, and they love the in-text annotations and the fact it actually suggests something for them to improve. Because it's one thing to point out a problem, but it's another to actually give them a suggestion that's, again, practical. So this is the pragmatic approach. It's built into JedAi. It's incredibly pragmatic, and we've actually added these. We haven't released them yet, but these are scales where you can decide how much help do you want to give to this student or this class, right? Because some teachers will say, "Oh, it's giving a little bit too much." So I just wanted to get it to consider something, but they could do here, and they still have to kind of piece it together. But for some classes, they might need far more explicit examples, and you can, kind of rev up the dial and say, give them the exemplary version of this, or give them an improved version of this to work off, or link it to an exemplar on a different subject matter. This is another thing we're building in, that they can then extrapolate the principle from. Right. And yeah.
It's just pretty sophisticated. And realistically, students are using AI.
Oh, yeah. And this is the thing. Every student's using AI. It's like over 95% statistically, they're using it. And one of the major reasons is for educational purposes, and it's often not good. It's hey, write this essay or improve this. Research assistant, amazing. It's a great way, I think, to access it, as long as you can verify the data that's coming back, and kind of a thought checker. That's how I use it a lot of the time. But to just kind of take shortcuts and get it to write for you, obviously that's what no one wants. JedAi, again, pulls the student and the teacher into the same workflow loop. And the idea is that the student is iterating over time with it. And you're using AI in a really constructive way versus what is going to be the alternative. So it's kind of like, which one would you rather, the teacher-designed application or ChatGPT and all of that? So as long as students still feel a genuine benefit, then they will use that because it feels more realistic to their assessment. Students are motivated by those marks and seeing improvement. So if you can show them that and build those incentives in, then and even like gamify it a bit, like we want to do some collaborative thing, seeing where you sit in relation to others. These are all things that need to be accounted for in a really good AI application. But JedAi at the moment is by no means perfect. It's a constant work in progress, and you've got to kind of keep getting feedback and iterating very fast. Just like essay drafts, we gotta keep iterating JedAi almost daily. So yeah.
Jonny, you have seen inside schools from the window of students, and also from going into them. If you could encourage educators, systems, with kind of your piece of advice, what would you say?
Yeah, I guess I would say, based on my experience of having some of the best teachers out there, I think giving students the opportunity to truly succeed requires a pragmatic approach. And I feel like it's doing a disservice to the students who want to do well and they want to improve to take that practical approach away from them. So I think lean into the pragmatism, set the benchmark really high, show them what the exemplary standard actually is. Then obviously make adjustments as needed for the students and the classes. That's number one. Cultivate a collaborative culture. I'm going back to these cultural pillars because these are the things that schools and teachers have to kind of pioneer and lead. Get that collaborative culture going. Enforce it so that part of the preparation for an exam, this is in the syllabus, right? You have to edit and you have to have collaborative exercises. Get students to look at each other's work and get them to critically assess it, right, in a constructive way.
Peer feedback.
Self-assessment. Sit at a table with a group of students, highlight where have you done things right and wrong, show them the exemplary materials, be really explicit about what the standard is, and then get students to help each other get there. So if you can facilitate that collaborative culture and have a very pragmatic approach, I think you can do wonders for a whole school. But it does start at the executive level, then the teachers, and then the students will naturally kind of buy into that.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time and insights, and also just the reverberation of enthusiasm and investment into education that you are pouring out into educators, systems, students. So
Thanks so much.